today we'll be talking about physical AI, which, as I've defined on the event page, is unlike traditional AI, which exists in the digital realm. Physical AI combines technologies such as artificial intelligence with robotics, material science, and advanced sensors to create intelligent systems that can sense, adapt, and respond to their environment. So you might hear a lot at the moment about AI broadly. This is what you could call a subset of that, or more an application. Two short quotes that I think are absolutely fascinating. One goes, 20 years from now, if you ask someone about AI, most people will associate it with physical robots that enhance their lives. That's the co-founder and CEO of Wave, the autonomous vehicle company. And the second, everything that moves in the future will be robotic. And that's Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA. So I think that kind of tells you just where we may be heading when it comes to physical AI. And that's the future, I guess, but what about now? So I think we're laying quite a few of the foundations from a strategy perspective for building this future in which physical AI becomes more intelligent, ubiquitous, and useful. I'm just going to ask that everyone is please muted. Fantastic. And things like the smart machine strategy, published in February, the modern industrial strategy, which is coming in the coming months, which has advanced manufacturing, digital and technology, defense as some of the growth driving sectors. There's an awful lot coming around the corner from a strategy perspective that will set the UK up for the next 10 years and beyond to make the most of physical AI. When you look on the technology side, the development of AI, robotics, materials, compute, connectivity, technologies is accelerating faster than ever, as many of our speakers will attest and explain. So final thing to say from me before we get going is that this event is part of techUK's Robotics and Automation Sprint campaign, which is a 6-month campaign exploring the future of robotic and automation technologies, convening the UK's technology sector to explore the challenges and opportunities behind the UK leading on the development, application, and commercialization of these technologies. So really exciting campaign. We've had a second meetup event on Monday. We had a productivity and automation insight series. I'll put the link in the chat to that later on. Yesterday we had a fire innovation forum on drones organized by our Justice and Emergency Services program, which was absolutely fascinating. And we've got lots more coming up, including we'll be at Humanoid Summit London on the 29th to 30th of May, and I have a discount code that I can share in the chat with attendees, which may come in handy. And we've got a fantastic workshop on the adoption of industrial robots in June, run in collaboration with UCL, and also doing lots at London Tech Week. So those are just a few things coming up. Check out the links in the chat as we go. Fantastic. Final thing to say from me, please subscribe to our technology and innovation newsletter, where you will find out about all of this stuff, plus much more. The link is in the chat. Brilliant. I'm now going to introduce, or let our speakers introduce themselves, and then we can, I'll run through what we'll be discussing. So Jenny, can I start with you, please?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Rory. I'm Jenny Reid. I'm a Programme Director at ARIA, the UK's Advanced Research and Invention Agency, and I'm running a programme on robot dexterity. I don't want to go on and on, but just a brief bit of context may help. So ARIA is a new government funding agency aiming to fund really cutting edge research at the edge of the possible, but we're very focused on applications. We work by identifying opportunity spaces, which are areas of science and technology we think are important, underserved and ripe. And I identified the area of robot hardware specifically. So clearly there's a lot of innovation and interest in robotics at the moment, but my sense is that a lot of that is about the control software and the AI, and the actual robot bodies are being somewhat neglected. So I decided to focus my limited ARIA funding on that. And my program is therefore about hardware specifically for robot dexterity.
Amazing. Thanks, Jenny. And Jenny very kindly contributed an article for our Insight series on Monday, which I'll post in the chat as well. So thanks again for that. David.
Hi, everybody. I'm David. I'm a venture partner at FOV Ventures. FOV stands for Field of View. We're a venture capital firm. We're very specialized in spatial computing, AI, 3D, and robotics. We have a small fund of 20 million euros that was launched 3 years ago, specialized in across Europe, investments in early stage, so day 0 to pre-seed, seed, and exceptionally Series A. We are raising a second fund of 50 million euros and have committed through that with anchor investors. And yeah, we started off investing a lot in gaming technology, VR, sort of metaverse type thesis, and have been expanding more and more into AI robotics in the last year, and are going to be very focused on that for Fund 2 as well. So yeah, we'd love to deep dive on that.
Amazing. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, David. Isabel.
Hi, thanks for having me, Rory, and it's very exciting to have this discussion about physical AI with you today. I'm Isabel Blanchard. I work for a humanoid robotics company called Enchanted Tools. We've been in existence for 3 years, and we have a unique perspective on humanoid robotics. Most of them that you see, the Boston Dynamics and the Tesla and Unitree, are coming from the industry. And we've designed a robot that is a people-facing robot, so really a solution for as a staff augmentation for an industry where labor is scarce, like hospital and nursing home and retail and hospitality. So we put a lot more effort on the design, more than the productivity or the efficiency.
Brilliant. Thanks, Isabel. And Michael.
Hi, yes, Michael Fisher. I'm a professor of computer science from sunny Manchester today, which is, it's always sunny. You should remember that. I'm, professor of computer science. My research is around autonomous systems, so AI robotics, autonomous robotics, making sure these systems are reliable and trustworthy, and trying to make sure that they do the right things. I'm also academic lead for a prosperity partnership deploying robots into unpleasant areas, so areas where you don't want people to go, you'd like to send robots instead. And I guess related to your initial introduction, I do a lot of work with standards organizations like BSI and IEEE, and also I spend 2 days a week on secondment to DCIT, advising on AI and robotics. So that relates to your policy thing, I think. But I'm not speaking on behalf of DCIT at all.
Nope, absolutely. Okay, thanks, Michael. That's brilliant. So just a quick overview of what we'll be discussing. We'll start by talking about the technology itself. So we'll say what technologies will be integral to the future of physical AI. We'll then talk about transformation. So how is the advancement of physical AI set to transform industries and business models, with a particular focus on the UK? Then we'll look at the opportunity. So how can UK industry benefit from this transformation while prioritizing things like safety, security, and ethics? And then finally, we'll touch upon some of the challenges. So what more must the UK do to unlock these opportunities to drive growth and productivity? I'll try and leave some time at the end for audience Q&A. There's so much to discuss, but I will try my hardest. And I think without further ado, we can just jump right in. So on the technology, maybe David, it'd be good to start with you. So why robotics now? You mentioned that pivot that FOV Ventures made. What motivated that? What makes now a good time to be talking about and investing in physical AI?
Sure. I would say pivot. I would say maybe expansion into the investment thesis. But yeah, I mean, I actually, from my background, I'm more of an operator, and I've been in the media content industry, and working at Google for 6 years. I was exposed to the first AR glasses and the first VR headset there back in 2012, and jumped into immersive technologies, believing that it was the next era of computing. So for us, the thesis is investing in the next era of computing. It's thinking after the mainframe, after the the PC, the computers, the desktop, the mobile phones, what are the next computing platforms that we human will use to gather information and interact with the real world and make our life easier? And certainly the coming of generative AI in the past few years, because AI has been around for a long time. I'm sure Michael and my other colleagues can talk about that, but Gen AI in particular has made it easier for anyone to sort of enter prompts and gather information from around the world. And that's been very text-based in the past few years. And I think what's been missing is an understanding of the physical world and the real world. And for computers and machines that is the most difficult thing, is to understand how the physical world works, the gravity and everything, the interaction of objects and whatnot. So we at FOV have always been investing in sort of computer vision and visual understanding, in the sense of using cameras, monitoring the world, and also in building simulated environments through game engines, 3D, Unreal Engine, Unity, etc. And so Gen AI now, with multimodal AI, where we now start also integrating the understanding of the physical world through computer vision and through vision, by ingesting images, videos, but also using technologies close to us. For example, putting a VR headset on and using controllers to operate machines, which we call teleoperations, also helps train new foundational models that can be used in the real world for things like robots. And then the last example I would use is, for example, we've invested in a company called Nunu.ai in Finland, which inserts AI into NPC, into game characters, and that allows the company to roll them out into game environments and to test out games really quickly, more quickly and efficiently than humans would do. And they found out that by having these NPCs infused with AI behave in a simulated environment, they could then use that model they've developed into a robot, in that case Boston Dynamics, into the real world, and that robot was able to perform thanks to the training it had in that simulated environment. So we see huge crossover and convergence of a lot of these technologies, metaverse type technologies, VR, AR, as well as generative AI that builds on world understanding. There's also a lot of other factors that probably my colleagues will talk about, with hardware costs that are decreasing now, 3D printing that allow you to build these components. So all of these convergence with tech stacks like power through GPU and CPU progress. We invested in flow computing as well on that domain, and also connectivity. So things like that just make it the right time, the perfect storm, to be able to step into physical AI, the embodiment of that AI and that understanding of the real world.
Amazing. Yeah, sure. I mean, it sounds like, yeah, the boundaries or the barriers between the physical and the digital kind of dissolving or disintegrating before our eyes, and use cases popping up, between those two. I think, Isabel, maybe you'll say that you're kind of grounded more in the physical than the virtual. Is that, could you speak a bit about that perspective as well?
Yeah, it's really exciting time to be in, because I can't show you the robot, but we can share the link so you can visually see it's in the category of the humanoid robot, but it's more like a character. So, and it's the size of a 10-year-old kid, like 4 foot, and even with that robot, that it's kind of smaller than the other humanoid robot you see on videos. You still have more than 550 components, hardware components, in a robot like this. So from a hardware perspective, it's already kind of challenging to build, and then you add on top all the complexity of the, for example, in those hardware components, you've got 26 motors that need to work together, and actuators, and then of course you have the NVIDIA Groot N1 GPU, which is the GPU they've just released for robotics, and then on top of that you've got all the LLM models, the one you create yourself, and then the likes of OpenAI and Mistral, so you can really have amazing AI conversation thanks to AI. And then on top of that you have the software, which is as critical and important as the software, and then the difference with robotics is you have to add a firmware layer so that the software and the hardware can work together. And then you've got the usual how you manage data, because of course you have conversation with those robots and they capture what you say, but also they capture your mood and the flow of people, for example, if they're in a social environment. And then you've got all the part of the fleet management. So if you deploy a fleet of robots, which has been done in non-social environment, which is much easier to manage like they do in Amazon warehouses, you still need those robots not to crash into each other. So all put together, from a technology perspective, it is a very complex ecosystem.
Absolutely. And just linked to that, I think, so Isabel, you've spoken about the pure, just the amount, the volume of components in a robot. Obviously, assembly and manufacturing, I guess, becoming incredibly complex and advanced. Jenny, are you able to speak a little bit to just how that's impacting the dexterity of these robots? I mean, how easy will it be to interact with them in the near future? And therefore, how accessible will physical AI be for consumers, but also potentially for industry and, you know, in other applications?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, my program is focusing on dexterity just because that's so essential for many of the things that we would want robots to do for us. So I feel like at the moment, robots can move around the world and navigate environments increasingly well, but they're still really challenged at doing even the simplest manual tasks, right? So they can go and inspect a valve and find that it's open when it should be closed, but, you know, actually closing that can be challenging. Or even something like wiping a table can be beyond today's robots. So that's very much what we're focusing on, and trying to figure out, okay, there are software advances that can improve dexterity, but lots of people are already working on those. What are the barriers in the hardware that need to be overcome? And specifically, what are the ones where the timeline's probably a little bit more advanced, so that if we don't work on it now, other people won't. As Aria, we're trying to look for the gaps and the white space that's being neglected. So one thing that I think is absolutely critical is tactile sensing. So if you think about your own dexterity, it's kind of ironic that robots are currently driven very much by vision, and that's basically because cameras are ubiquitous and cheap. And vision, of course, is important when you're doing a dexterous task. But, you know, if I ask you to close your eyes and tie your shoelaces, I think you'd be able to do that just fine. But if you couldn't feel your fingers, I think you'd have a really hard time, even with vision. And you'd be very slow and clumsy, which I think is what we see in today's robots. So tactile sensing is one really important area, and we're funding a number of different approaches to that. Particularly trying to go beyond fingertip sensing. So, you know, many robots today don't have really any tactile sensing. They may have a force torque sensor at the wrist. They may, if they're very sort of cutting edge robots, have a fingertip sensor. But there aren't really the technologies that just cover the robot in sensitive skin, such as we have. So we're looking at what kind of technologies could advance that. But then, of course, you have all the problems of, okay, and now you've got that information, how do you take it off the hand, for example, and interpret it within the robot? And how do you interpret that information? So with cameras, robots are benefiting from, you know, years of research in computer vision and from the vast storehouses of internet data that enables computer vision algorithms to get really, really good. Of course, we have nothing like that in tactile sensing. So there's just this whole area of interpreting that data that will need to be developed.
Absolutely, yeah, I'm sure, and applications for humanoids, but other forms of robot as well.
Very much other forms, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. And Michael, I'm curious to hear about other the types of AI kind of system that we're talking about here. So I'm conscious you might have something to say about neurosymbolic AI and just what kind of underpins all of this.
Yeah, okay, I'll get to that. Let me just go back to the title of the webinar, which is physical AI, and we've got to remember there isn't only one form of AI. There's lots of different forms of AI, and they all have benefits and drawbacks. And I think the barrier we have at the moment is understanding those benefits and drawbacks and how we put them together. So the predominant AI of the moment is data-driven machine learning type, generative AI type things, which are very good for pattern matching and searching, not very good for correctness and explaining why they didn't choose something else. But there are other forms of AI which have different and useful properties. So good old-fashioned rule-based systems or logic-based systems are very good for transparency, for explainability, for verifiability. And what we need to do in these physical systems, particularly autonomous robotics, is to actually plug all these together in the right sort of ways to do what we want. Fortunately, most of these systems are quite modular. So plugging together different components, some of which are generative AI, some of which are symbolic AI, some of which are control components, adaptive control, lots of different aspects can be done. It's just working out how to fit them all together and how to use the right type of AI for the right type of activities. So if this system is required to make an autonomous decision, you want to make sure that you can analyze that decision making before the decisions are made and actually work out that it will always make the best decision in some sense, and you need the right type of AI for that. So understanding what form of AI you need in what particular part of the system is important, and how to plug them all together, and that's neurosymbolic AI, which as it says on the tin, is mixing together neuro-inspired AI, so data-driven AI, together with symbolic AI, and trying to plug them together and get the best of both worlds. Yeah.
Yep, fantastic. Okay, brilliant. Well, I think that was a really useful overview of some of the key technologies that that are underpinning and will underpin physical AI. I'd now like to talk a little bit about the kind of transformation of industries and business models. Before I do so, I'm going to put the link in the chat to the Humanoid Summit London that I mentioned that we'll be at, and there's a code if you would like 15% off your ticket, which I'm sure people would. Brilliant. So now I'd like to go, I think, to Jenny to talk about, I think, one of the most obvious ways in which physical AI might transform industries and business models, high value manufacturing. So Jenny, curious to hear your take on just why that is so. And from what I understand, there are a few kind of unique aspects to that industry that make it perfectly suited for the adoption of physical AI.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, people often talk about, say, I don't know, elder care or applications like that for robotics, but I think those are really challenging because they're very uncontrolled environments, they're very high stakes, it's really bad if anything goes wrong. And the current human labour is low paid and it's very low margin work. So I think if you think about where robots are most likely to be adopted, it's more or less the opposite of that. So where the environments are controlled, so like in manufacturing, you're in a factory, you don't have to worry about members of the public or children or, you know, a very unpredictable environment. The work is high value and high margin, and there's a lot of potential for automating work that up till now has been unautomatable, because you could have a vast assembly line or production line for high volumes of manufacturing, but if the volumes you're manufacturing, or, you know, the need for customization makes that impractical, at the moment a lot of that is still being carried out by human labor. And so I think it's really exciting to think about what would it take for robots to be able to assist there. So one concrete example that we're looking at, we're working with the National Composite Centre, who are keeping an eye on the work carried out by our creators. They have a really interesting use case, which is composite layup. So if you're making material out of carbon fibre composite, if the shape is simple, that can be automated and it can be made by machines. If you're making a cylinder or something, like great, no problem. But if you have a shape that's at all complex with, you know, bumps and indentations, then that's still being done by human technicians. And it's not very pleasant work. The material has been pre-pregnated with various resins, and so there are fumes. It's not a particularly pleasant environment. The work is sort of physical and you're stretching this composite over a mold, so there's a risk of repetitive strain injuries and so on. And there's a difficulty in recruiting staff to do that. So it really feels like an ideal use case if we could get robots that were just that bit more dexterous and able to understand the forces they're applying and sense, you know, has the material been laid smoothly around the mold. I think there's great potential. And yeah, that's the sort of area where I'm really excited about the value for dexterous robotics.
Sure, I can imagine. No, very exciting. And just to kind of contrast that, I think, Isabel, Jenny's obviously spoken about more kind of B2C. I guess, oh, sorry, B2B. I guess the B2C, be that C being kind of the patient or the retail customer, is where you step in, right? So there's a kind of different side to it. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, and I totally agree with Jenny. It's much easier to deploy robotics in a very controlled environment where there's no human, there's no hazards, factors, kids running around, etc. But also, I think it's that the technology is moving really, really fast. We've been talking about robotics for 100 years since Asimov wrote sci-fi about robotics being a different species. But I think it's now coming. It's a reality. So it might take years until we really be able to deploy all those robots in social environment. But at least that's our ambition. That's the problem we're trying to solve, especially in elderly care, because the problem will increase. The population is aging. There's less and less people who want to do those jobs. So you're right, the margins are very low. But especially in the American market, when I meet CEOs of senior living communities, they want solution. They don't have a solution. So they have to go beyond recruiting people because there's not enough people to recruit. So they're now starting. There's a lot of deployment of service robots that are so in social environment working during daytime. But they do one task. They're either cleaning space or they're transporting, like the Moxie robot in the US that is circulating and transporting objects and saving millions of steps from the nurses or the caregivers. For us, we're looking also at interaction. So we've done a lot of experiment in elderly care home and hospital. We have a robot in a dental practice currently working and in a pilot situation. And those robots, when you explain to people that you can really touch them or go too close and you don't get them to move and navigate autonomously, they already bring a lot of comfort and services. So you kind of, because we're always thinking of delegating physical task, but the strain on staff in social environment and nurses and elderly care is a lot about the constant interaction you need to do with patients and residents that are kind of really looking and asking for more and more attention. So you can delegate all those because it's also a repetitive task. It's also draining on the brain to have to constantly interact with people. So those repetitive tasks you can delegate to a cute, endearing robot that cannot replace the human, but operate as staff augmentation. And I think you're right, Jenny, when you look at the limitation, but I also think that it's coming faster because we need solution. So it is there. And the service robots are already kind of in production and working in those public environments very well.
Sure, I think Isabel, that's a really interesting point. And David, I'd like to bring you in on that. Just I think the distinction between specialized and generalized robots, and where you see that kind of having the most impact within particular industries or sectors.
Is it okay if I step back a second and go beyond the robots? Because I feel we automatically associate physical AI with robots. But I think for us as investors, why we're so excited, and going back to my point about the next computing platform, when we think about physical AI, for us it's about interacting and acting upon the world. It's systems that can do that. So yes, it's robots that can move into space, but it includes autonomous vehicles. It includes smart devices that have sensors and actuators, and it includes drones and robotic arms. We invested in, for example, avatars and virtual beings. Is that physical AI? No, if it's not acting upon the world. If that virtual avatar is a receptionist screen and it's acting on door openings and access and other things, it's part of a physical AI system. We would consider that as physical AI. So I just wanted to frame that. If you think about it that way, for us, it is the next computing platform. It is the next way of automatically interact with the world, or having machines be our agents and act upon the world on our behalf. Then it applies to every single use case you can think about, both consumer and industry use cases. So that's why it's massive. That's why it's so interesting. So you name any example, I can tell you how physical AI might assist in making us more efficient, of course safer if you think about a nuclear plant or even a space station, but also with the aging population being able to accompany us and act on top of us. So that's why it's massive. I think in terms of, yes, specialist, generalist, it's very interesting that you see lots of very well-funded companies that are generalists, that are building humanoids companies. I mean, Isabel certainly one. I don't know where you include yourself, but that are trying to solve for every use cases, possibly in home and out of home. Then you have specialized applications. We've had robotic arms in industry for many, many years now. I think for Amazon, that has 750,000 plus robots already in warehouses that are doing many different things. They're sorting through packages, they're moving around the warehouse, they're assisting workers in safe environments. Certainly, they're one of the companies that are using the most robots. That is very specialized, but also starting to be generalized because they're replacing humans. In healthcare, it's a specialized applications for faster diagnosis, to look at samples. It's things like surgery, assisted surgery with companies like Da Vinci and others that are very well placed, where a surgeon might be around the world, controlling a robotic arm and solving for that. So in retail, you have many use cases as well, as Isabel mentioned, but it goes beyond that with defense, for example. We're seeing a lot of our investments that are, again, companies that might have focused on one use case that are becoming dual use case or more, that are able to expand into defense, for example, and it's a hot topic at the moment. We wouldn't invest in weapons directly, but certainly things that are helping automate or helping convey information to humans in a safer way and more efficient way are very important. So a lot of our portfolio companies are starting to expand into physical AI and robotics, again, because we're seeing these applications expand.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense, and I think there's a lot of that, I think, to unpack in the next section on the opportunities for UK industry. Michael, I want to bring you in here as well to get your take on this question of just where the opportunities lie.
Okay, I'm going to abuse the system by putting a link in the chat to Cradle. So involved in this Cradle activity, which is a large collaboration with Amentum, a large company, and the particular basis for this is to try and take people out of harm's way. So essentially, if you have people who are, as we mentioned before, going into nuclear situations, going to space, going into even not quite as bad as that, but unpleasant environments like inspecting sewers or inspecting the side of a motorway when it's still running, all those types of things. We're building robots to go in those places so people are out of harm, and it's a straightforward application of those things. But other applications beyond that, and obviously there's applications with organizations like Sellafield who are working with, there's infrastructure. Those of you in London have this new big sewer underneath London. The robotic inspection is done by the company that we collaborate with. So it's a robot inspecting the sewers instead of as well as a person, but instead of a person eventually. And the space things as well. So there's lots of activities there. I think also moving to slightly more, not esoteric, but difficult areas where you're deploying robots in a more unstructured environment, so uncertain environment where you don't really know what's there. There, it's much clearer that you need more reliable autonomy, and you need to understand the way decisions are made in unpredictable environments. And building those sort of robots, or building those types of systems to act reliably, is quite a sort of hot topic at the moment. And then going to Isabel's point, then social robotics is a hot topic as well, and trying to make sure that these systems that we're building are trustworthy and reliable in various different ways, so people actually want to use them as well as actually we could deploy them. So there are lots of different potential applications.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings us nicely actually on to the next section. So about opportunity and how UK industry can benefit from this transformation while prioritizing things like safety, security, and ethics. So Michael, I understand that you've obviously done a lot of research into the trustworthiness of autonomous systems. Can you speak a little bit about just where we are with that as an industry?
So trustworthiness is a slightly vague thing, but I'll try and give you an idea. So trustworthiness in normal systems essentially corresponds to reliability. You trust your toaster if it burns the bread to the right color, or it works properly. Trustworthiness in these more autonomous systems is not just reliability, since it's making its own decisions and doing things on its own, then do you believe it's doing the right things? Do you believe it's going to do the things for your benefit? And it's this sort of beneficiality. Is it working for your benefit that we're trying to expose? So making sure that the robotic systems that you build are transparent enough so they can explain why they're doing things, what they're doing, and why they didn't do other things is an important part of this. Not just that it's reliable, not just that it finds a path to do various things, but it can explain why it chose this and why this is the best particular option. And the transparency, again, I'm going to go back to neurosymbolic AI. If you mix the components in the right way, certain components are more transparent than others. You have more chance of analyzing these components and working out that, yes, this will always make the best decision given the information it has, even in an unstructured environment that you didn't know what was going on. So the trustworthiness thing is a lot to do with transparency and a lot to do with the transparency of decisions that are made, and why becomes a much more important, well, equally important question as well as what. You know, why is it doing this thing as opposed, you know, as well as what is it doing?
Yep. Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, Isabel, just on the big kind of why question, obviously when it comes to your humanoid robots, I guess baking in things like safety, security, ethics from the very start of the development process is absolutely essential. Can you talk about just how you do that and how that's kind of part of the development of a physical AI system?
Yeah, and you're right, it's paramount. So I'll follow the lead from Michael. I'll share the link so you can see what that robot looked like. But because it has been conceived as a social robot to work in public facing environment, we put a lot of effort on designing the safety. So for example, this robot cannot grasp any object that they want. Of course, they obey by voice. So if you imagine that robot working in a care home, we don't want one resident saying, go in the kitchen, get a knife and stab my neighbor because he annoys me, for example. So we've designed handles that has kind of a QR code or design on it that only the robot can grasp. So we equip accessories, and it can be anything. It can be a trolley, a basket, a light, a scanner, anything. We equip our accessories with that handle. So we know that the robot will not be able to do anything else than grasping those accessories that are useful for them. The second one is we've designed what we call runes, but they're Bluetooth token that you give to people or you put in specific spaces and you say, you are not allowed to go in that place. So you program, so of course the robot knows the space. So you can say you're not going into the drug section or the theater operation section, for example, in a hospital, but you can also have more flexibility on saying today you're not allowed to go in that place. Or you give the rune to, more important, to nurses or caregiver, and the robot will only obey to that person that has that token, because that's kind of what you say. You say, today you're only working with Nurse Jenny. So you can talk to anyone else, but you're not going to get orders for anyone else. So that's been our solutions. I mean, I'm sure there's other way to do it, but that's how we've designed it. And then of course, in the personality of the robot, it's a super kind and sweet robot. It doesn't insult anyone. It doesn't talk about politics or religion or anything like that. So there's also all the ethics. And if they don't know what they say, I'm not allowed to have this type of conversation with you.
Sure. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. I can see why those things are kind of baked in. David, keen to get your take on this question.
Yeah, I mean, going back to use cases and just to pick an example on autonomous vehicles, you know, I think by 2027, the UK government is opening up the trialing of autonomous vehicles. So that's going to be a really important milestone, quite behind compared to the US and some other countries like China. If we think about how these systems will perform the best, it is access to visual data, amongst other things that we've talked about in the panel. So of course, there are LiDAR technologies and other types of cameras on the vehicle itself. But ultimately, if you think about connectivity in the cities that we live in, and the ultimate goal is to live in a smart city where things are autonomous and you have access to all the information. If you have a bus coming, you know the route it's taken and when it's coming and whatnot. for the vehicle to be able to access cameras, for example, that are placed all around streets across London, for example, will make it even more efficient because they'll be able to see not only in front of it or in the corners, but what's coming the next street over or the next street after that, not only for planning, but for safety, pedestrians, accidents, and other things. So we are living in a city that has one of the most amount of cameras in the world, for better or for worse. I'm not going to debate that, but of course you are accessing a trove of visual data and information. So there's ethics and security and many questions behind that of storing that data and using more visual models, foundational models, and how to train all of those. Then these will get into the home, as we've discussed as well. So then, you have Apple that's working on a robotic arm potentially in the home, where you'll be able to control a lot of your appliances and automate a lot of the things that are already connected. Internet of Things and digital twins of your home is also coming. And then you have access to all the inside visual data of people's homes. I mean, huge ethical problems. But then, it's the question of how far do we want to get for these systems to perform and to be useful to us, while preserving that privacy and the data. So yes, it's very important for us to be investing in companies that are considering the safety and ethics from the start, that anonymize the data at source and secure that visual data.
Yep, no, absolutely. That makes sense. I'm going to post 2 quick links in the chat at this stage. One is that productivity and automation insight series I mentioned at the start that Jenny very kindly contributed to on behalf of ARIA. And the second is something I'm also very excited about, which is a role in my team that we are currently recruiting for, to basically be the new Rory and do a lot of what I've been doing over the past 2 years, which is run our sprint campaigns like this one, the robotics and automation one. So do check those out. And there we go. I think I still want to leave time for Q&A. So what we're going to do is the final section is on challenges. And essentially, what more must the UK do to unlock these opportunities to drive growth and productivity? So a bit of a free-for-all, kind of could be ethics, could be strategy, could be funding, could be regulation, could be skills. So what I'm going to do is just quickly go around our speakers and just ask for if there's one thing that you would like to see the UK do, maybe government, maybe industry, maybe academia, over the next 5-10 years to turn a lot of what we've been talking about into reality, just what would that be? And Michael, I'm going to start with you. Sorry to do that.
It's okay. I'm going to be slightly annoying and say, well, no, I'm not going to wish for the AI bubble to burst, but to be a little bit more realism about the applicability and usability of different forms of AI. At the moment, this is the magic dust that you sprinkle on everything and it can do everything. And it's not true at all. It's just, I'd like us to get to a stage where we understand the different bits of AI, how they can be used, what their benefits and drawbacks are, and use them in a responsible way. That might be a little way off yet, but that would be nice.
Amazing, thanks. No, I completely agree with that. Isabel.
At the risk of sounding very continental, I think the physical AI and AI, they can be a fantastic booster for growth, no doubt, if the government does its job. So if you draw some parallels with history, 100 years ago, 1 every 300 people were killed on the roads in the UK. Today, it's 1 every 22,000 people. And that's because the government stepped in and regulated not every car manufacturer, but the infrastructure used by everyone, the roads. And I think that's where the government needs to do the job. As David was saying, if we have autonomous vehicle everywhere and drone flying everywhere and more data capture, then that's great, but the government has to do the job of regulation.
Sure, thanks, Isabel. Jenny.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I might also pick up on regulation as being potentially quite an easy win, right? It's easy to say, oh, we would love lots more funding. But I think regulation, there's the potential here for the government to really unlock innovation and growth by giving clarity around some of the areas. So, for example, delivery bots on pavements or drones. It feels like there's scope to really unlock some possibilities there and maybe take inspiration from other countries that are ahead of us here. So I'm excited about the new Regulatory Innovation Office, and I'm hoping that that may tackle some of the problems here.
Yep, Fantastic. Thanks, Jenny. And I'm just before I go to David, just to say there's a great question in the chat. Any more questions that you have for our speakers, please put them in and I'll get to them in just 1 minute. But David, over to you.
I mean, yeah, I think we all mean positive regulation because, you know, for me and being an investment, it's hard because you don't want too much regulation that kills startups. So yeah, I mean, for me, capital for sure, super positive to see Aria and other players that are receiving capital and just having more public capital, like in other countries, sustaining growth in that sector is really primordial. And I would say talent, because as early investors, we always invest in talent first and foremost. We have amazing talent in the UK. Across Europe, we have amazing universities, Cambridge, Oxford, and many others. So it's kind of encouraging more of that upscaling in robotics engineering, spatial computing, AI safety. Yes, that is definitely, for me, a priority.
Amazing. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Great. So as promised, we're going to go to a bit of Q&A. So we have one question right here. I'll start. What is this? Can you post the IDs? So one question earlier on in the chat was directed to Michael about standards. Can you post the IDs of the different standards so we know what to read to understand how we comply to any standards if using physical AI? Michael, is there an easy place to find standards around these sorts of things?
I should say there's way too many standards at the moment, so I don't know them all at all. But there's an AI standards hub in the UK. So if you go to the AI standards hub, that gets you through to quite a lot of standards. But there's a lot of standards in the world that are never used for anything. And it's not just standards, it's the regulators using those standards. And that's the sort of standards are being developed, but it's getting regulators to use them in the right ways and making sure that they actually can have some effect on physical AI. So I go to the AI standards hub to begin with, or IEEE pages have a lot of standards. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michael. Question, and this might be Isabel, I think, and Jenny in particular, a really interesting one. Designers of physical AI systems face a paradox. Anthropomorphic features, whether resembling humans, children, or animals like dogs, can facilitate intuitive interactions and emotional connections, yet may simultaneously create problematic expectations about a system's capabilities or intentions. Ethics. How are you seeing folks navigate this tension in design choices?
And it's a very interesting question. I could go on forever, but that's exactly the reason why we design a alien character from an anime with a whole background story that they come from a foreign planet, etc., and they have their own language. It's exactly for that reason, because when you have that interaction, then your brain doesn't associate it with anything that you know, and you don't then have the same expectation of what the robot can do, because it's clearly identified as a alien species. And you're right, the problem with those robots that look like human, you expect a lot from them. And also what's interesting is the one with like Boston Dynamics and the Optimus from Ellen, they all come from the sci-fi. They're very big and very scary. And when you see them in video, like working into your home, you're like, I would never, ever have a robot like that playing with my kids and kissing goodnight to my grandma. So there's an interesting paradox, and you wonder whether they even thought one day about the design and the impact on humans.
If I can jump in, I do agree with that completely. And I think one of the reasons for the interest in humanoids is that they have this sort of psychological hack. They convince you that they're much more capable because of their humanoid form. So they must be as capable as a human, right? Yeah. So I think that is potentially problematic. A great use that I saw, I thought this was very clever, was a very simple autonomous mobile robot moving things around in a warehouse. And it didn't make any promises in its form about how capable it was, because it's like a little, flat disc on wheels, but it did have eyes, and they found this to be helpful because of course it is detecting people and obstacles as it goes around, and so the eyes indicated, I've seen you, right? It would look at you, I know you're there, I'm going to go around you. And that was very helpful in interacting with people in the warehouse, and yet it's such a simple thing, it doesn't overpromise on what the robot could do. I thought that was a really good example in this space.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fascinating. Jenny, I'm going to stick with you just for a quick answer on this one as well. Can you tell us high level the challenges you see in tactile sensing in wet and wet chemical environments, e.g. dipping auto parts in coatings and paints?
That's a great point. I'm not sure I've got anything very deep to say on this. None of the tactile sensing technologies we're looking at are specifically addressing that. I suppose you're thinking about the challenges of like if the tactile sensing gets wet, if the hands go into the wet environment. So I think just very high level, we'd think of, protective equipment for robots. Like, can you put a robot in gloves and then strip that off afterwards and dispose of them? So I think that's all I've got to say about that at the moment. If MS Unverified has got particular insights into the challenges there, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, and feel free if you posted that question to put your email in the chat if you'd like someone to follow up. Question for David. I'm keen to learn further about physical AI for computing applications, non-robotic. Any orgs that you are supporting from FOV?
If I could merge that with another question I saw on agentic AI, if that's okay.
Yep, sure.
Because there was a question around agentic AI, and yeah, for me, it's a component of physical AI. Agentic AI is about autonomy and acting upon the world on behalf of a human, for example, as a system. So we have invested in a company that does agentic AI. They're called System2AI in Finland, and it's acting upon the screen and doing stuff on your behalf, like it could reserve a restaurant, etc. So it's not really physical AI. But again, back to my example before, if it's part of a bigger system that can act upon security and other things in the real world, then it is physical AI. So yes, we are looking at agentic AI. The other example I gave in the video game with Nunu AI, which is a company that does video game testing through NPC characters. Again, that's an agentic AI where you have an autonomous system inside a virtual world that is doing things, but you can then transpose that, because it's built a foundation model, into a robotic system that has world understanding through that training. So that's where we're really excited, is that interaction between digital and physical, and how we might work with companies that are developing products for digital that can be used for the physical world. I think back to a discussion slightly earlier, which is super interesting to me, is how our world is built for humans, right? And that includes the machines. Like the way that we interact with websites, for example, is all built for humans. So now when you look at agentic AI and AI agents that need to act upon the stuff that we do online, it's very hard for them to do that. They have to be trained for that. That's the investment we did. And you've seen an example of two agents that are interacting and they start speaking in code instead of using the way that we would. So I think for me, it's a bit of the same in the physical world. Our world is built for humans, not for machines. And that's why there's an approach to humanoid robots that can do a lot more than a robotic arm on a wheel might do. So again, very interesting to think about how everything should be changed, or everything can be transposed to the physical world to control these machines.
Yeah,
hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Just going to put two final links in the chat. One, if you'd like to stay up to date with what I do at techUK on LinkedIn, then please follow me, and also subscribe to our monthly tech and innovation newsletter. Question from Jonathan at Innovate UK, who does some amazing stuff on the futures side of things. I think it may be one for Michael. Any thoughts on employing physical AI in actually performing R&D to scale up the amount of R&D, or research and development, we can do to address the biggest challenges we still have, so-called Science 5.0, i.e. combining non-physical AI to read papers and design experiments that physical AI then carries out before the results are then analysed by non-physical AI, and so on. Michael?
Yeah, so it's not an area I work in, but I know of colleagues who work in this sort of robot scientist type area where essentially they're trying to do that, trying to automate the scientific process of going from reading the papers to, let's say it's chemical discovery or something like that, trying to discover a new chemical, then have a robot that does actually the experiments to test these things and put in the whole cycle. Yes, it's possible. I don't know whether it's going to change the world, but it's a very important place to start. That's all I'll say.
Sure. Okay. Anyone else want to come in on maybe a bit niche? Nope. No worries. And I'll have one final question here. How important is synthetic data from virtual sensors in 3D simulated environments for training computer vision models, especially for performing in rarely occurring or hard to stage in real life scenarios?
I mean, I could speak really briefly and say that there are many companies looking at this. So if you look at Google with Genie 2, for example, or Meta or other types of well-funded tech companies, they are looking at text to image to 3D to world simulation creation. And again, it's using Gen AI. But speeding up that process allows us to really quickly build these virtual environments that we can then train models into with physical understanding. So there's a brilliant video of Dennis Fasabis actually in 60 Minutes and another online that you can check out from last week, where they go into that a bit more.
Amazing. Well, there we go. I just want to say a huge thank you to our fantastic speakers for what is a webinar that could have gone on, I think, for hours. Really excited about what's next in our robotics and automation sprint campaign. So do check out our innovation hub and our newsletter. And thanks again to everyone for joining, and to our speakers for a really fascinating conversation. So I'll see you all again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Bye.